three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, recount Jesus' cleansing of the temple toward the end of their narratives, between the triumphal entry into Jerusalem and the Passion. St. John recounts the cleansing at the beginning of his Gospel. The Baptist bears testimony to Jesus. Jesus calls his first disciples. Jesus and his disciples join Mary at the marriage feast in Cana, and then, having gone up to Jerusalem for the first Passover of his public ministry, Jesus cleanses the temple. The Synoptic Gospels describe the cleansing of the temple within the context of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. He's acclaimed as the Son of David, the Messiah, and as such he claims and purifies his holy place. St. John, however, describes the cleansing long before the triumphal entry. Where the Synoptic Gospels seek to lead us step by step to the conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, John has already proclaimed it in his great prologue, reinforced with the words of John the Baptist, "I have seen and borne witness that this is the Son of God." At Cana, Jesus, the Son of God, manifests his authority over his creation, turning water into wine. In the temple, he manifests a different sort of authority, ridding it of what did not belong there, restoring it to its proper use and dignity as a house of prayer rather than a house of trade. Jesus manifests his authority over creation. Jesus asserts his authority over the house of God, his zeal for the holiness of that house. But the leaders of the people are not pleased with what Jesus had done. After all, it was they who, faced with widespread gouging, had chosen certain merchants of good character and set them up in the temple precepts to provide animals suitable for sacrifice at a fair price and convert pagan currencies to the special temple coinage at a just rate of exchange. All this to protect and benefit the people of God. And now some unknown Galilean takes it upon himself to come in and drive these merchants out? Just who does he think he is? And that's the question they put to him. What sign have you to show us for doing this? In other words, do something, show us something that will demonstrate your authority to do what you have done. And Jesus does proffer a sign. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now that sounds like nonsense to the rabbis. To begin with, no faithful Jew would ever even think about destroying God's holy house. Beyond that, Herod had begun to rebuild the temple some 46 years earlier, and the work still wasn't complete. Will you raise it up, they ask, in 3 days? But for the evangelist, this was Jesus' first prophecy of his death and resurrection. His disciples didn't realize it at the time, and the leaders of the people certainly didn't. But Jesus was speaking not of the stone walls inside which he stood, but of the temple of his body. The Shekinah, the glory of God, had filled the earlier temple at its consecration by King Solomon. That same Shekinah had manifested itself to the prophets, both in its presence in the sanctuary and in its withdrawal because of Israel's sin. The temple was indeed a holy place, or at least it was meant to be, and that is why Jesus cleansed it. But holy as it was but a foreshadowing of a temple yet to come, a greater temple, the temple that arrived on that day, the body of the Word made flesh, the human body which the Son of God took as his own body, his own dwelling place. Destroy that temple, Jesus tells the rabbis, and you will see a sign. In 3 days it will be raised. And so it came to pass. Jesus is put to death, and on the 3rd day rises from the dead. In a certain sense, you could say the 4th Gospel is an account of the steps that lead to the fulfillment of this prophecy. Jesus tells us that his body is the true temple of the living God. His words refer directly to his physical body, the body which will die and be buried, the body that will be raised and ascend into heaven. This is the body whose resurrection is the sign of Jesus' authority to cleanse the temple, the sign of his authority to teach all he teaches as from God, and to do all the mighty works that he performs. But when the church speaks of the body of Christ, it doesn't speak only of Jesus' physical body. He himself tells us that the bread of the Eucharist is his body. And if it truly is his body, it, no less than the physical body, is the temple in which God dwells, the place where we meet God. Likewise, St. Paul speaks of the church as the body of Christ, his mystical body. And we're the stones of which that temple is built. But this body is not simply the sum of its parts, which is to say, the body is holy irregardless of the holiness or lack of holiness of its members. What makes it holy is the fact that it too is God's temple. God is alive and present to us in the gathered community of his church. God has come to cleanse the temple in Jerusalem. But the one who cleanses it is himself the new temple, the man who is God, God made present to us as man. And even after he ascends to his Father in heaven, this presence continues. The most holy Eucharist, the species of bread and wine, are his body and blood, the temple in which he is present to us. The church itself, both in its universality and in its manifestation in each local congregation, the church itself is his temple, the people in whose midst Jesus dwells.